Hey, Leilani with the Magical Solution here. So I wanted to come on because I oftentimes get asked within my classes and sometimes even in DMs, I oftentimes get asked, how can I integrate, spirituality into my daily life? Like I'm so busy. There's just so much going on. I have kids. I'm married. I'm taking care of my sickly grandmother. I have 2 jobs. Blah 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 blah. Like real life situations, and it oftentimes baffles me that when people learn about spirituality, that one of the first things that they don't learn is that there is no separation between the mundane and the spiritual. Like when you get to a certain point in your mysticism, when you get to a certain point in your esotericism, when you get to a certain point in your spirituality, you begin to realize that the veil between mundane and spiritual is technically non-existent. If God, if spirit, if the universe, the divine force, the unified field, whatever you want to call it, if that is the essence of all things that we can observe of the observable universe and the things that are yet to be observed in the discoverable multiverse, if all of that is the essence of God, essentially, then when we say, how do I integrate this into my mundane life, what we are actually saying is that we see spirit as something separate. Here's my life over here on this side, and here's my spiritual life over here on this side. And what a mystic says, what an esoteric practitioner says, what a spiritual person says, is that there is no separation, there is no difference. One is not over here and the other one is over here. They are one in the same. So when it comes to quote unquote practicing your spirituality, it brings us back full circle to this idea that you must stay mindful, you must stay alert and aware and discerning. And these words have become so overused that there is a sort of social rejection of them. Whenever you hear someone say, oh, be mindful, there's like an immediate visceral like, ugh, it's one of these new agers again, but the reality is that what they are saying is that because spirit and mundane are not separated, being mindful, being aware, being alert and discerning is a practice in observing the spiritual within the mundane and the material. So if you're not alert, if you're not aware, if you're not discerning, if you're not mindful, of course it's going to seem like 2 separate things. And people like that, unfortunately, they wait for something to prove itself to be spiritual. And this is why individuals like that, who do not practice mindfulness or anything like that, are people who are heavily dependent upon ritual, heavily dependent upon ceremonies, heavily dependent upon initiations, heavily dependent upon, mounting and possession. These are people that cannot believe it exists until they are in that space and conjuring and calling in and really like engaging with that spirit in that way. And that's a problem. That's a problem because spirit isn't always that obvious. Spirit can oftentimes be very subtle. Spirituality and the expression of spirit can be so subtle that it takes you to sit in silence, in meditation, in a quiet, observable state for you to pick up on it. Spirit is in the breeze. It's in the birds chirping. It's in the sound of the worms moving through the soil. It is it is the sensation of a rock. And all of those are very subtle energies, but they're spiritual energies. You understand? So when people ask me, how do I go about integrating spirituality into my daily life, I say, you already are. You just need to observe it. You just need to be mindful of it. And one of the ways, a few practices that I offer my students, is to put that mindfulness into daily tasks that you're already doing. So if you're washing the dishes, be mindful about washing the dishes. Allow yourself to feel the water running on your hands. Allow yourself to have the smell of the soap and to look at the bubbles and the lather that you're creating, to discern whether or not the dish is actually really clean by rubbing your thumb on it to hear the squeak, right? Like, there are so many pieces of what it is that you're doing that if you are to just pay a little bit of attention to, you will see spirit. Spirit will speak to you. Spirit will come through in its subtle ways, right? So that was just one thing I kind of wanted to talk about. The other thing in relation to what I'm saying is that usually when I say this to people who are like really like oppositional and like have a hard time understanding what I'm trying to say, they'll usually say something like, well, if God essence is in everything, then what about like war and famine and abuse and neglect and all these horrible things that we see in nature? Is that God too? And the reality is, yes. Yes, it is. It's not the most favorable expression of God. It's definitely not his good side. It's definitely not the one that you want to take home to mom. That's for sure. But whose fault is that? Whose fault is that? It's not God's fault. God is just expressing itself through us. The fault is in us and in the choices that we make. If we choose to have war, then that is the way God will express itself. If we choose to be abusive, then that is the way God will express itself in that way. Right? Because God is the perfection of whatever it is that we're doing. And so if we choose to engage in war, God will express itself in the most warlike way. If we choose to be abusive and violent, God will express itself in the most abusive and violent way, because it is the perfection of the things we choose to express. Okay? And so in moments like that, when I get asked those kinds of questions, my response is, yes, of course, all of it is God. The most beautiful, perfect things and the most grotesque, insidious things. It's all an expression. But the key is to not get caught up in these dualities. The key is to stay focused on your journey and what your choices are. And those choices may be amazing, beautiful, awesome choices, and you may fuck up and make mistakes. Either way, you give yourself grace because God is moving through you. Either way, you stay positive because no matter what you do, you are on the path of progression. You have no choice. And when I say you have no choice, what I mean is once you know something, you can't unknow it. Once someone explains to you where you have done wrong, you can't unknow that. And so if you choose to do wrong after you have been explained, then you are staying stagnant. It is a choice to stay stagnant. But you know that you can do better, and you know you can choose better. And by just that knowledge alone, you are progressing. It's just a matter of you acting upon that. Okay? So this is all a long-winded way of saying, the material and the spiritual are one and the same. Your choices allow you to sense spirit and allow you to progress with spirit's favor. And I hope you found this information helpful. My name is Leilani. This is The Magical Solution, and this is how we grow.